Assalamu alaikum. Inshallah you're well, guys. So today we're going to talk about psychometric tests. Now for me, this was the hardest part of the online application because firstly, there wasn't any research that I could do to set myself apart from other candidates. It was all about practice. Secondly, if you're like me, when it comes to tests, nerves could come into play. And thirdly, most tests were time limited. So the pressure was definitely on to get things right first time. So psychometric tests typically fall into two common categories. The first one is personality tests. And this is where an organization is testing your motivation for applying for the role, your behaviors, and your values. So a wide range of organizations have already adopted personality tests as part of the online application. So there's a good chance that you've already come across this. And these tests, as an example, will include statements. So a statement may be, I am motivated. And you have to comment on a sliding scale between 1 to 5 as an example, where 1 may be strongly agree with that statement and 5 may be strongly disagree. So although that's a common example, it is very basic. It's more likely when you're applying to these accounting and finance schemes, you'll have to do situational based tests. And this is where you may be given an example work-based scenario that you may come across. And this could be in the form of watching a video which explains that scenario or reading text. And you're then given a number of options and you have to rank those options in terms of which is the best action to take all the way down to which is the worst action to take. So guys, I am going to give general tips on psychometric tests later on in the video, but whilst we're talking about personality tests, I wanted to focus on two main points. So firstly, when answering these questions, make sure that you're answering from an organization's expectation rather than your own. So as an example, say you're at an interview and you're asked, what do you like to do in your free time? You're never going to say, I like to sleep. You're going to adopt that persona and tell them, I like to do this, I like to keep busy, I like to keep active. Make them hear what they want to hear. The same principle should be applied here. So if you recall, firms are always looking for skills such as communication, leadership, well organized, time management. So when answering these questions, you should always be thinking which is the best option to show off the top skills that that organization is looking for. Now, some people may disagree with the tip I've just given because they will say you have to be truthful and it's best to be honest. However, my counter argument is, well, everyone or most people will adopt a persona when it comes to interview. So there's no reason why you can't do the same at the psychometric test stage. And just one specific point around personality trait questions. So when doing these examples of tests, you may find that you're given 20 statements. So remember what I said before, this is where you may be given a statement such as I am motivated, and you have to rate that based on whether you strongly agree with the statement or strongly disagree with that statement. So when you're doing a test with lots and lots of statements, it's very likely that statements will reappear, but they've been reworded slightly. But what you've got to do in that instance is make sure that your answers are consistent. So say you agree with statement 1, that may reappear as statement 15, but slightly reworded. You've got to make sure that your answer is consistent and that you agree with that statement as well. So the key takeaway there, guys, is pay attention to the answers you're entering and make sure you're consistent. So moving on to the second type of psychometric tests, these are aptitude tests, and common examples include numerical. So this is where you're being tested on how you understand and interpret charts, graphs, data. You've got verbal reasoning as well. So this is where you're being tested on how you understand and interpret information. And then you've got abstract reasoning. So this is where you may be given a series of pictures or diagrams, and you've got to then complete the series by selecting an option. So guys, when applying to schemes, those are the three most common types of aptitude tests you're likely to come across. However, there are more. So in the description below, I've left a link to a very recent relevant article on psychometric tests. I definitely recommend checking it out. So guys, one point I just want to raise with aptitude tests, you're likely to find that most are time restricted. So this means that, as an example, you may be given 30 minutes to answer 25 questions, and this is where the pressure can really get to you. However, with personality tests, they're unlikely to be time restricted because an organization wants you to be quite truthful, quite honest. They want to assess your behaviors, your values, and if they put a time limit on that, that can pressure you into lying. So that's why you may find that personality tests are not time restricted, whereas they want to pile the pressure on when it comes to aptitude tests. So those are time restricted. So guys, moving on to some general tips to help you out. If you've done your research, you may have already come across these, but I still wanted to go through these tips because I have some real life examples to help you understand why these tips are so important. So the first one is always read the instructions. So before starting the test, you'll have a screen full of instructions which will tell you about any information you may need, any equipment, how many questions there are, if there's a time limit, how long. That is all very useful information. And if you follow my advice and you've applied to lots and lots of firms, after doing these tests a few times, you may feel comfortable and you may think, you know what, I could just skip through the instructions. My honest advice is definitely don't do that. Always read the instructions because each firm will administer their own tests, so the instructions may be slightly different. So guys, here's my example to highlight why it's important to always read instructions. So it's 2010, I'm applying to KPMG, which is one of the best schemes, actually the best scheme that's going at the time, because that was the first year they announced a degree apprenticeship program. So this is where you got a fully funded degree as well as the ACA qualification. So I've got through to the online testing stage. I'm very confident because I've had lots of experience of completing psychometric tests before, and I've passed every single one to date. And I get to these tests and it's just a numerical and a verbal reasoning test. I go and do the numerical and I absolutely smash it, did really well. I did the verbal reasoning and it was the exact opposite. I completely tanked it, did not do well at all. And I was very confused at the time because, like I said before, I'd passed every single test. So this wasn't my first experience. So I got in touch with KPMG to better understand what went wrong, and they explained to me that they were looking for accuracy. So as an example, if you had answered 10 questions but got 8 right, you are better than someone who had answered 25 questions and say got 12 right, because the accuracy percentage was higher. So that was really annoying for me because if I had bothered to read the instructions, I would have known. And this had a massive impact because I obviously lost the opportunity to join a great firm on the best scheme there was at the time. So hopefully now you're clear, guys, on why it's always important to read the instructions. So moving on to the second tip, which to be honest with you is the best tip anyone can give you, and that is practice, practice, and do more practice. So I'm in year 13, guys, and there's a lot of people who I go to school with who want to go into medicine. So they're doing something called the UK CAT, which are a group of aptitude tests. And as part of that, we're looking at an example of abstract reasoning. So we've been given a series of clocks with arms pointing at different times, and we have to work out which clock completes the sequence. And there were 3 clocks, and I remember this example because the arms were at 12 and 7 in the first clock. The second one, it was 1 and 6, and the third one was 2 and 5, and we had to select which clock completed that sequence. And the answer was 4 and 3, and we're honestly looking at each other. We couldn't work it out. Why is the answer 4 and 3? So we went to the back of the book, which had solutions, and it explained that the answer was 4 and 3 because the sum of the arms was equal to 7. So let's go through that. So the first clock was 12 and 7, or 0 plus 7, which is equal to 7. The second one was 1 plus 6, which equals 7. The third one was 2 plus 5, which equals 7. And the final one must have been 4 and 3, which also equals 7. So now, whenever I look at questions involving clocks or numbers in grids, I always add things up to try and work out the pattern. And that's not because I'm smart. It's because I've seen a previous example like that. That's why practice is important, because you may come across an example which is followed in the actual test, and then it's actually just a memory recall rather than you worrying about what to do next. And in terms of practice, there's lots of stuff out there. So you could do Sudoku, crosswords, loads of apps that test your brain. You can also visit specific sites which are designed for graduate and school leaver tests. So an example is assessmentday.co.uk. I definitely recommend checking them out because the resources are good and they're reasonably priced. I think you can get a year's access for about £40 a year, which is much cheaper than other alternatives. So the third tip, guys, is always be prepared. So for your numerical tests especially, you'll probably need a calculator, some pen and paper to write down your calculations. You don't want to click start on the test and then go around rushing to find those things. So make sure it's already prepared. Like I say, tip 1, read the instructions. They'll tell you what you'll need, and make sure you can't be disturbed as well. You don't want your brother or your sister coming in asking for your help on something or asking a silly question whilst you're doing a time limited test. So let me give you my example now. So I'm doing numerical test for the first time and I've got my calculator, but guess what? I think I'm good at maths, so I'm overconfident. I've got no pen and paper. So when I'm doing the test, I quickly realize that a number of questions are actually linked to each other and they're off the same data or chart. And what that means is, say if I've done some calculations in question 1, they may come in handy when answering question 3. But guess what? I'm overconfident. I haven't written down those calculations, so I have to reperform those. And that was wasting precious seconds. So guys, those were my tips, but definitely make sure you check out the article in the description below because we will have some great information on the different type of tests, but also some links to where you can practice for free. But before I go, guys, I just want to address one challenge that you may face, and that is you may be tempted to cheat. Look, guys, I understand why you may feel tempted to do that. There's a lot of pressure to secure a job, but the honest answer is don't do it because it is wrong. And what you may also find is that at the assessment center stage, which is the last stage of the application process, you may be retested on numerical and verbal reasoning, as an example, to make sure that you didn't get someone else to do those tests at the online application stage. So even if you did get someone to do it, there's a good chance and a risk that you'll get found out at the final stage of the application. So guys, definitely don't ask me to do the test for you, but if you have any other questions or queries, please feel free to comment below or message me on Instagram.